Hello, and welcome to our segment, Women Who Do Wonders. I'm your host for this segment, Dr. Ashleigh Huffman, Program Specialist at the U.S. Department of State in the Sports Diplomacy Division. I can honestly say it's a tremendous honor for me to be here on stage alongside these two incredible women. To my left, Major General Jeannie Leavitt, first female fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force, and to my right, Dr. Jen Welter, first female coach in the NFL. In case you didn't know, these two women are flat out amazing. They're the type of women that they make superheroes off of. No, really. So let me start with a couple of fun facts to embarrass both of you and to just talk about some of your accolades and who you are and how lucky people are to hear from you today. So I don't know how many of you all watch the Marvel movies, if you're a Captain America or Spider-Man or Iron Man kind of fan. But we have with us today the character basing for Captain Marvel. And when I read the description, what are the superpowers of Captain Marvel? Well, it's this superhuman strength, endurance, physical stamina, the one who can problem solve faster than any of the fellas and can manipulate energy with her mind. And today we have with us the person who, the real life superhero who this character is based on, Major General Leavitt. So she is our super hero for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be part of this today.
Absolutely. And to those of us in the sports world who grew up as athletes or watch Sports Center, this second woman is no stranger. She's been on every talk show, in every newspaper, and was even quoted by President Barack Obama as someone who is shattering glass ceilings and paving the way for other girls and women in sport. She's fiery and feisty, this dynamo in a sea of giant men on the football field, but she's also a PhD and a children's book author. Please help me welcome Dr. Jen Welter.
It's so good to be here with all of you. I've got to say, if I could swap places, inspiring the Marvel, like Mrs. Marvel, might be way cooler. It definitely is. But I have had a whole lot of fun in what most people thought was impossible as well. So maybe we'll get them to go ahead and have another female superhero, because I think we need way more female superheroes, because most of the time we're doing the work, we're just not in the spotlights. That's what we all know, right?
Absolutely. More female superheroes. I like it. Maybe after this conference, we'll have a few more to talk about. So I was just looking, I was doing my research in preparation for the panel. And between the two of you, you have, I think, 4 master's degrees and a PhD, 3 children's books, 3,000 combat hours, the title of the first, which no one can ever take away from you, and really a spirit of determination that's unmatched by most humans I know. And as someone who's worked in about 80 countries, I know a lot of humans. So I think I'm a good judge of this. And I think despite any and all fatigue or pressure you may have felt, you went for it. And, it's really impressive to me to see where you are and to know that you've paved the way for people like myself in many fields. And I just want to know, to start out, what does it feel like to be the first? What does that look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like to fly planes at 1,000 miles an hour, or to be in the huddle on the field at the NFL? So, Major General, can we start with you? What does it feel like to be the first, and what were the conversations around all of that?
Sure. Well, I'll do one point of clarification real quick. I have about 3,000 flying hours and about 300 combat hours, just to clarify that part. But I'll be honest, I never wanted to be the first. I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. And the way my timing worked out is why I ended up being the first. When you finish pilot training, I finished in January of 1993. And at the time, your assignments were based on merit order. You would stand up and select your assignment. And my timing was kind of strange, because while the law allowed women to be in combat, the Department of Defense had a policy that did not allow women to go in combat. There was a fighter, but I wasn't allowed to ask for it. Well, I wasn't allowed to have it. I've received all kinds of unsolicited advice for what I should or should not do. But in the end, I decided that I had to ask for it. I knew the answer would be no, but I also knew that at some point the policy was going to change. And I didn't want to have regrets. I didn't want to look back and say, I always wanted to fly a fighter. And people say, well, did you even ask? So it was kind of scary at the time because most people told me I should not ask for it because I would ruin my career. I'd be a troublemaker. But I had to do it for me. So I stood up. I asked for the F-15E Strike Eagle. I was told no. I was directed to make another selection because I did not qualify to fly that aircraft. So I did. And I actually thought I had the world's worst timing. But I felt good that I would not have that regret. So I chose another assignment, moved to my next base, and got ready to start training it. And as luck would have it, 3 months later, the Department of Defense changed their policy, and they remembered that second lieutenant who had stood up and asked for the F-15E and swooped me back and said, guess what? You're now going to go fly the F-15E, and you're actually going to be the first one to do it. So didn't want to be the first, just wanted to be the best. I just wanted to do it, quite honestly. And so having that opportunity was incredible. You know, I didn't want the attention, but I will give the Air Force credit in that I went eyes wide open because they warned me that being the first would have a lot of attention. And I said, well, I don't want the attention, but I really, really want to fly fighters. And so that's how I ended up being the first. And there was a lot of attention, and I put a lot of pressure on myself because I thought, okay, I have to do well to keep this path open for those who want to follow. So that was a little bit of what it was like for me.
Beautiful answer, and can totally understand. I think, so many times as women, we take ourselves out of the race before the race even starts. We think, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't even ask. But what happens when I look at you and I look at other women like Dr. Welter and I say, well, if you're the best and you're the most qualified, then that seat belongs to you. And you're so used to following the rules, but what happens when the rules aren't fair? And you talked about, okay, well, maybe I'm going to be a troublemaker, or maybe I'm going to cause problems. Did you ever feel the weight of an entire gender on your shoulders?
At the beginning, I did feel a lot of pressure because there was a lot of publicity. And when I would go to different training events, people were constantly checking on how I was doing. And so there was pressure there, but my leadership did a great job of trying to shield me from that and trying to let me focus on the training. But it was different when I would go to a training program. Everyone else would go and get their, checklists and their equipment. And I would have to go do a press conference and then, catch up with the rest of my team. So there was definitely a tension there, but they tried to isolate it to the beginning and end of training sessions and let me just focus on the training when I was in the actual program. But I did. I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to do extremely well as I could do so that others could then follow this path.
Yeah, I love it. I didn't want to be the first, but I wanted to be the best. I think that's a commonality probably on this panel. So, Dr. Welter, for you, what was it like, a day in the life when you took over in your position with the Arizona Cardinals? What was that like for you? What did it, from start to finish, what did it feel like?
Yeah, I'm going to back up just a little bit and say, one of the important things about being the first is it gives other people permission to dream bigger and to see themselves in that position. Because as much as I loved football and I had this wonderful, I always say I was married to the game, right? For richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. And definitely at times it felt like only death could pull us apart because there was just this love that just drove me for so long. But I never had a vision that I could coach in the NFL. It was never a place that I looked at and said, I want to be there one day. And so to even have gotten there to me was surreal because when I was playing, women just didn't coach. And I wouldn't have ended up with the opportunity in the NFL if I hadn't played men's pro football and really caught the attention of some people in not just my love of the game, but my ability to convey that information to other people, right? And the guys would even joke when like I played, they'd be like, oh, she's like our little coach on the sidelines. Cause though I see big in person, I'm only 5'2", so I would be a little coach, regardless, unless they're like 10. So it wasn't something I ever set out to do. I think one of the important things is that, like, once you are in that position, you do know that being the first means that the whole narrative of women coaching, or, women fighting fire pilots, or being a fire pilot, sorry, is written through your experience, because there's not anybody else to pull data from, right? It is the entire sample set at that time. So the responsibility and opportunity of being first is to ensure that you're not the last, right? Be so good that everybody says, well, of course you should do that. Not, oh, is that possible? Right. And so for me, that was a big part of it. There was a lot of attention. I came from, playing for the US national team, for example, and winning gold medals and nobody even knowing we existed, to an NFL press conference. And, that's not me saying I want a press conference. That's what the team does. And you are put out to the world. And that means that you have the people who are going to love you for it. And then the people who, think that this is the change that should not happen. And so you hear a lot of it. And yet for me, it was like, none of what they say, either the positive or the negative, is going to help me do my job. And so I tried as much as I could to really, I didn't watch any of the news. I didn't even have a TV hooked up in my room. Like, I tried as much as I could to just be present and be great. And I think that that's the defense of the publicity, is like, none of the publicity matters if you don't do a great job. And so you know that you're doing a great job, not only for yourself, but for everybody else who wants that job and who sets that example. So when I got there, one of the things that was most impressive to me was how excited the players were. Those guys of the Cardinals were so proud to be a part of history. And, they were so used to having overcome to be able to get where they got, that what we had in common was this overcoming of the odds. And so they were my biggest fans and supporters, and still are in a lot of ways. And for me, I had studied, one of my major focuses in my master's was on coach-athlete relationships. Now, I had no idea I was going to end up being a coach, but the formation of that and the importance of, making sure that the guys were people as much as they were players, then actually was part of the secret to my success. Because in such a commodity-driven environment, it's very easy to, see those guys with their big pads and their big helmets and think that they're not real humans. And yet, if you're not really focused again on what we're doing here with the X's and O's, and you're worried about something else in your life, then you're not going to be here. And so they always said, like, she was not only a good person to learn from, but she also helped you be a good person. And that to me was really kind of a special dynamic. And just being able to finally focus on football full time. Right? That was one of the biggest differences between women and men. Like, when I played my career, we were work by day, play football by night, and for me to go to school by late night. And yet finally I got to have my whole world be football. And it was really refreshing and cool. And to be able to prove that even in the final frontier for women in sports, that women could be successful, and just hopefully open minds and open doors through that.
I love it. I mean, it reminded me as you were speaking a lot about what my dad used to say. And I would say, but Dad, what if I fail? And he would say, but what if you succeed? How important is that for so many other people? So that's what it reminded me of as you were talking and sharing that. I think also, I read a quote once and it really changed me. It said, there are two important days in the life of a human: the day you are born and the day that you understand why. So, Major
Mm.
General, I would love to start with you. Who were you as a young girl? When did you know you had a date with destiny? And what were you like growing up? And was there a certain event or something that triggered you or pointed you in this direction?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I was the third of four girls. I was extremely competitive with my little sister. She was a year behind me in school, and we competed at absolutely everything. And it just built this incredible competitive spirit within me. And it also set us both up for success because, in order to outdo the other one, we both had to have straight A's, and we both had to do well in sports. And the biggest driving factor was actually competition with my little sister. One of the things that I did through high school, I had a love of horses. I absolutely loved riding horses. I didn't get to start until I was about 12 years old because my mom was not a big fan. She was a little scared of horses. And then when I was 16, I bought my own horse. And he was not probably the traditional first horse because he was very young. He was a stallion and he was not broke for riding yet. But it was what I could afford as a 16-year-old girl working part-time jobs. And so I bought this horse, and together we learned, and I learned the meaning of courage. I learned the meaning of not giving up. There's the expression like, when you get thrown off the horse, get back on. Well, I got to experience that literally as we were learning how to have him be what turned out to be an absolutely amazing horse. So some of those things kind of drove part of my spirit. I had a very determined spirit. I loved everything about flying, but I actually had never been in any airplane, even a commercial plane, till I was 18 years old. And that also came from the fact that my mom did not want to get in airplanes. And so we did family vacations via other modes of transportation, usually in a car. When I was 18 and I just graduated high school, I was going to visit my uncle in New Mexico. And so she bought me an airplane ticket. And that was my first time on any airplane. So it wasn't something I knew from a young age that I wanted to do. And that's one of the things I like to pass on to young kids, is the fact that dreams can change, they can evolve as you get exposure to new and different things. I knew I wanted to, well, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to college. I knew I loved math and science. Everyone said, well, you should be an engineer. And I said, well, what do engineers do? And they said, they solve problems, which I didn't understand how it was a job, but I said, okay, I'll try it. I was studying aerospace engineering at the University of Texas and crossed paths with a lieutenant that was waiting for pilot training. Asked a whole bunch of questions, and that changed the course of my life. I then decided I wanted to join the Air Force and I wanted to be a pilot. And so it's interesting that when you look back on a person's resume, it looks very well planned and structured. But in all actuality, it was a series of events that led me onto the path that I ended up on. If that gives you some insight.
Yes, it's that's what I used to be a professor before I took this job at the State Department, and I would always tell my students, they would come in and they would say, well, my major is undecided, and I would say, your major is open-minded, so you just explore your dreams as they come today. And for me, it was also interesting because as I was going into graduate school, I had a professor who said, yeah, I think it'd be great for you to go to grad school. And I said, yeah, me too. What is it? So I completely understand, looking back now over the last 15 years of my life, a similar right people, right place, right time, positioning you in that way. So thank you for sharing that story. Dr. Welter, I'd also love to know from you, what was your personality growing up? Did you realize that someday your life was going to be something very special? Think especially for all the parents out there, you're like, is my daughter bossy or is she a leader? We're trying to decide what to call it right now. So can you tell me a little bit about who you were as a young girl and then how it developed into this?
Yeah, I can. I was always this very independent, very like strong-minded, strong ideas kid. And part of that comes from my dad, who, my connection here, and for some of you who don't know this, I have a deep love for the military. My dad is a Vietnam hero. He has a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars. He was a medic in the 1st Infantry Division. And he just had this way of putting things that it wasn't like I'd go through a situation and he would say, oh, let me tell you a story about that. No, he had these stories and I had to then pull out the meaning, right? And one of them was, if you're going to be dumb, you better be tough. So you got yourself into it, you better get yourself through it. And it reminded me of your story with your horse, honestly. But it was okay, there's just toughness and you signed yourself up for it and it's your job to, get through it. And, he found his family in the military. Those were his boys. I remember asking him if he was ever scared when people tried to kill him. And he was like, Jenny, I was mad. They were trying to kill my friends. And I was like, oh, okay. So we don't get scared. We just do what we got to do. And all through my life, those stories really impacted who I was and how I thought of things, and I would pull on them. And I remember all this information that I would get from different places just kind of formulated how I believed the world is and should be. And people who know me now know I have an easy yes and a hard no. An easy yes is, of course, I want to do that. We just have to figure out the details. A hard no is, I'm not doing it. And that's the end. There's no details. There's no dollars. It's just, it doesn't fit with who I am, right? And that comes a lot from how I was raised as a kid with those stories. And I think it tells a lot about me now because I still see and think of stories and function in that way. When I heard about Joan of Arc, and I had to actually check this with my dad. I'm like, did this really happen, Dad? And he was like, oh yeah. It was, I heard about her and I was like, this is not right. And I went home to my dad and I said, Daddy, it's a really good thing that I was born now. And he said, well, Jenny, what do you mean? And I said, oh, they would have burned me at the stake. What young child says that to their dad, first of all? And I had to wonder, what did you think about that, Dad? But he's like, that's just how you were. You just had this motivation. Now, I couldn't have told you how it would play out, but that sense of right and wrong and a belief in destiny and, just putting in the work and being willing to follow a path that doesn't have clearly defined bumpers or parameters in it, just really being willing to put your head down, do work, and step up to challenges is how I've lived my whole life. My former teammates say, Welter lives her life one adventure at a time, because no one could have seen that this was possible, and yet we would expect nothing less, right? And so I think that that's really important for people coming up, is we have, like you said, this clear resume, and it looks like it was very well planned and it moved from one thing to the next, but life doesn't work that way. And the things that we learn aren't for us are as powerful in defining who we are as the things that we decide that we like, right? When I made my first football team, there was no future for girls in football, right? It was almost 20 years ago. And the only promise that I made myself was that I would step up to every challenge the game put in my way. I had no idea what that meant or what I was getting myself into with that promise, but that's still how I go about it, because when you are at the forefront of something, you don't have the ability to follow someone else's roadmap. And yet you can do a whole lot of good and accomplish some crazy things if you're just really committed to the work and to finding the place where your talents are maximized, and then your voice can hopefully be one that advocates for change and for other people.
Totally. Reminded me of something that I would always say is that your power comes together when your passion and your purpose collide. And so when you understand what it is that you're gifted with, what your passion is, and how you want to make change in this world, that's where the true power comes in. So thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, it's not ever easy to be the first. It may look glamorous. Someone just told me yesterday, trailblazing women can always feel the heat. And so I think part of being a leader is also actually leading. So it's not just about being first to the table, but rather how you manage the people around you, because leadership in the most fundamental sense is a people business. And so for all of those women who are listening, and men, and they're trying to carve out a niche, and they're new, or they're first, or they're pioneer, what advice would you give them? How do you all win people over? What is your style in terms of creating that camaraderie and solid leadership? And so anybody who wants to take it first is welcome to.
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I guess I would say, one of the training programs I went through that was particularly challenging was called Weapon School. And there are 3 attributes that you will learn before you graduate from that program. And that is that you will be humble, approachable, and credible. And I think that applies into a leadership role as well, because you need to be credible in what you do. You also need to be humble, and you need to be approachable. And so I think that's kind of a good baseline. Personally, I found that getting to know the people is such a critical part of this. Because as a leader, your job is to take care of the people, and then they will take care of the mission. There's so many sayings, that, they don't care what you have to say until they know you care. But it really comes down to getting to know the people around you. And then you need to create an environment where they feel empowered to bring their opinions. You don't want to be surrounded by people who are just going to agree with you because they think that's what you want to hear. That, oh, great idea. I want the people who think differently, and I want to create the environment where they will bring those perspectives. Diversity is a huge interest for our Air Force leadership, and we want people from different backgrounds who bring different perspectives, because that diversity of thought is very, very important. And I've seen it in action. If I have people that are with me that think a lot like I do, we'll look at a problem and we'll come up with a solution. It'll be pretty fast, but it won't be much different than if I had just sat down and looked at the problem myself. But instead, if I have people around the table who think differently and bring a very different viewpoint and a different perspective and had a different background, we'll look at a problem and it is going to take longer to get to a solution, because you're going to be looking at different aspects of the problem that you never would have. But I guarantee it will be a better solution because it will be from a broader perspective and you'll have different viewpoints. And so I think that diversity is so important. And it's not just the diversity. We talk about diversity and inclusion because you can have a diverse team. But if you don't have an environment where everyone feels included and everyone feels empowered to bring their opinion and bring their perspective, you're not going to have that diversity of thought. So that inclusion part is very important. So people feel empowered to bring their ideas. And so that's something I try to do all the time. And it's been kind of funny because in my last job in recruiting, I was out a lot talking with different groups and, welcoming different ideas. And at one point, a captain who's several ranks down from me emailed me directly with his idea. And I thought it was awesome. My team's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he emailed you direct. I go, I think it's awesome. And I sent it out to my team. I'm like, let's see how we, move out on this captain's idea. But you've got to create that environment. So that's just a few thoughts I have.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Welter, do you have anything? And then you remind me of something.
Yeah, I absolutely do. It's interesting how you can have people from such different situations have such consistency. And these are things that you don't hear a lot. And I think that this, again, is part of the importance of having women in those leadership roles, because a lot of the traditional quote unquote leadership guidelines don't necessarily follow a lot of the things that we're learning now about leadership, right? You know, there are a lot of coaches who don't want to hear the opinions in the room. And yet you have those people in the room because they're experts, right? And one of the things I always say about diversity is that if you're that person, you have to make sure that you bring that voice, because you're only as good as your willingness to bring that voice to the conversation. And having been, you know, the one of one, or the one woman speaking up for women within football in different situations, you know, when you bring them up, there are going to be a lot of people that don't want to hear about it. And yet, I'm not someone who believes that you just don't want to know. I mean, I have been both in the situations where my voice was valued and in other situations where it was not. And as someone who has a robust opinion, that becomes really difficult, right? So I always tell people, I'm like, whether I'm in the conversation because I'm a woman, or because I'm a PhD, or because I'm the only one in this room that's under 6 feet, that means the way I look at the problem is going to be a little bit unique, and you want it. Because if you're redesigning a kitchen, that whole top shelf does me no good. But I may want the bottom shelf to be much more significant. And they'll laugh, but I'm like, that's what diversity in vantage point means, right? And if you look at diversity and you think of it as a diamond, right? The brilliance of a diamond is only revealed when each facet is brought to light and allowed to capture the light in a slightly different way, right? No one would tell you we just want half a diamond, so why would you want half the conversation, right? The brilliance is there. And I always thought that that was kind of a really cool way to think of it. For me, in terms of approaching situations, humor is a big part of it. It always has been, because you know that there are going to be moments that are just awkward and not necessarily ill-intended. I always say intent is very, very important. And so I always give people like kind of a one time test of, you know, there was just a disconnect between brain and mouth. And that, like, at one point, there was a good thought that maybe started here, but something went horribly wrong here. And it, you know, especially having one woman where they're not used to it, there are things that are just conditioned that you say in those situations that they don't even think about or mean. But it's an opportunity to create a tie as opposed to a confrontation. And why do I say that? Because I would literally say to them, wow, you do realize you said that out loud, right? And every one of us, I don't care how smart you are, have had those moments where the words just came out wrong, like where it was like, if only I could take them back. And then, of course, they would say, as long as they weren't ill-intended, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant. I'm so sorry. Oh no, that's okay. I know what you meant. I'm just coaching you up on this, that collection of words should never be used in the real world again, ever. And what would happen is, because they knew we could talk it out before freaking out, there were so many situations where people would be like, hey, so I wanted to talk to you about this. And like, how could I approach this? Or, man, you were so cool in that situation where you just kind of set me straight. Like, and it oftentimes allowed us to build a very special bridge, because I would tell them, like, I'm not going to prejudge you. I'm going to treat you exactly how you treat me. And that means love, trust, and respect. right? Like, I love you, and that is at the core of everything we talk about and we do, right? I have nothing but the best intentions for you. So whether that's in your life or on a football field, that's what we're going from. Now, I know I can help you, and this goes into what you said, right? You can only lead people to the extent that you know them, right? And for me, especially from sports psychology and then into coaching, my philosophy is, if you trust me enough to actually bring me into your world so that I can see through your eyes, hear through your ears, even, fly a plane through your skill set, then I can help you. But if not, then I might be giving you what I think is very good advice, but I'm just guessing. And in worlds which parallel each other often, in both the military and in sports, where we're trained never to admit fear and never to admit weakness, that's a very tough place to get to, and yet one of the most valuable, right? So if you trust me enough to bring me in, I will always be able to help you. And I love you enough to take the time to get there. And once we do, there's nothing that we can't do together. You think you will resist on, like, I need you to get better leverage, hit the heel depth, squeeze down before you go to the quarterback. Like, that stuff becomes really easy.
Yeah, nice. So for anyone who just tuned in to missed it, leadership in 3 words from Major General's perspective: humility or humble, approachable, and credible. And then from Dr. Welter, love, trust, and respect. All important, also important. And my brain was racing as both of you were giving such powerful answers, just in the sense of emotional intelligence and empathy and how important they are in today's world, and how there is this sixth sense, and I think in Major General's case, from her Captain Marvel character, a seventh sense even, on the relationship of self, relationship of the situation, and relationship between people. And so I think that's really important and something unique for women to bring into leadership. I also loved the points about diversity and inclusion. There's the quote that people say, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So yes, your room can look very diverse in terms of experiences or gender or race, but unless everyone feels the ability to speak freely, it's very difficult to get to those opinions that are typically silenced. Also thought it was important to talk about the differences, not just in our physical appearance, maybe it's age, maybe it's socioeconomic status, maybe it's ethnicity, but in also, in the difference in thought and how important that is, and where you grow up in the country, and the types of experiences that you've lived. Very important. All of that was so powerful. I'm going back and listening after the session. So another question for you all, and I think it's a hard one for me especially. I'm a big time hugger, lover, just want everyone to feel okay about themselves and feel encouraged. So conflict, it always happens in leadership. How do you deal with those difficult personalities, especially as women in leadership, people who maybe try to undermine you or create obstacles for you? Was there ever a time where you dealt with conflict, and was there ever a time where you wanted to throw in the towel and didn't? And why didn't you? So Major General, how do you deal with conflict, and how did you not throw in the towel when you wanted to?
Well, I'd say that we all are going to face adversity. We're going to face challenging situations. And there's a term I like to use that I've heard defined many ways, but it's grit. You've got to have that determination, that perseverance. You've got to be willing to, when you get knocked down, you get back up again. It's that grit factor. And how you develop it, I'm not sure. I think our experiences help do that, and then we see others and we can follow those examples. I would say that in my case, I I like to use happy persistence. Okay, when I'll run into conflict, I'm also a very logics-based person, and so sometimes when there's conflict, people will use the emotional argument. I think it's the engineering background, the science and math, but I'm all about like, let's get ground truth, let's get data, let's take the emotion out of it for a moment. Step one is define the problem, and so often when we are in situations there's emotions. There may be different things that have happened in the past. I think that's one of the things that's helpful in the military is every 2 years you change jobs, typically on the officer ranks and the higher ranks. So you get a fresh look and you get a fresh perspective. And so I know things have happened in the past, but let's focus on right now. Like, let's define the problem. Because so often I find that we want to get to a solution, and so we don't take the time. The quote from Einstein, I believe, is if he had an hour to save the world, he'd spend the first 55 minutes, defining the problem, and then the last 5 minutes coming up with the solution, because that part is so important. And so what I've found is I like to kind of take a step back and define the problem and then try to have a logical base. The emotion helps the argument, but you got to have the logic base. And then the happy persistence, attitude is so important. There's difficult personalities, but the fact is you need to work with folks. And so having that happy persistence, that sense of humor, I love that brought up because that is something I've used many a times. I've had some pretty contentious situations. I had a situation where we were deployed and I had to bring some really bad news into my boss, just a logistical problem. And he was very, very frustrated by it. And I got voted to be the person to have to walk in there. And it had not gone well for previous people. So I said, okay. And I put on all my flak jacket, my helmet, everything. I was completely kitted up when I walked in. And when he saw me, he had to laugh before anything else. And that helped lighten the mood. So I said, okay, well, sir, I have to deliver some bad news. So I think it's the attitude goes a long way, and it's hard. And sometimes you will get frustrated, but it's having that grit factor, the not willing to give up, that digging deep inside and who am I? And I'm going to persevere through this. Those are just a couple of my thoughts.
Absolutely. And I think you're right, taking it down to ground truth, although I've never called it that. That must be a very science and math thing. But I love it. And it's, I heard once, you can win the point or you can win the person, but it's hard to do both. And so even though emotions may help you win the argument or win the point, it may not win the overall situation. And so, Dr. Welter, from your perspective, I am sure there have been times where people have tried to create conflict, cut down, say, oh, maybe not give you the respect that you deserve on the field. How did you win those people over?
There's so much to this conversation. I think we could have a whole seminar just on the can of worms we opened up, and some of the truths that she just shared. I'm going to say, and I'm going to add this one to you because you'll like it. In football, we know we're going to get hit, right? It's not even a question. That's part of the game, right? So when you get hit, get up and do it with attitude, right? And throughout my playing career, one of the things that I did strategically is, it was a really good thing to get a master's in sports psychology and a PhD while you play, because I was kind of like my own science experiment, right? Like I would try it in my own game and see if it would work. And one of the things I knew I needed to do as a small player was make sure that I never stayed on the ground. Right? Because if you stay on the ground, it means you're grounded, right? You're hurt or somebody bigger got the best of you. So I would pop right back up. I would tackle the biggest girl out there, pop right back up, oftentimes say, hey, baby, do you need a hand up? Because I'm going to be here all day, right? And that's not really something that you do. People like to talk smack. So I kind of never did, because talking smack at 5'2" isn't really intimidating. It's kind of just funny, right? Like if somebody's like a foot taller than you, they kind of just want to pat you on the forehead. They're not scared. So how can you be that person? And mine was like, oh, I would just smile at them and I would blow kisses at people on the field, but I would pick up that person and then get to the huddle. And even so, sometimes in the huddle, I was literally like, oh my gosh, you guys got to help me up, or hold me. They'd be like, man, Welter, that was a big hit. I'm like, I know, hold me. I just need a minute, right? But the importance was the impact that not only the play had, but everything that happens in between that play had on everybody watching, right? Like, I would never put my head down. If I was tired, I would go on one knee and sit like this and watch you. So I looked like I was energetic while other people were tired. And it really did create this persona of this like invincible being. They were like, Welter just bounced around the football field. Made like I wasn't going to outbig is a lot of what I take now into situations of conflict. Not that I belittle myself, but I also know all of the things that surround the situation. There have been many times where I might have gotten mad in a situation, handled it, took it, cried my eyes out, fixed my makeup, and gone back to face the world, right? I said like it was my war paint, right? Or sunglasses are a great thing, right? Like, there have been many things that I've gone with in sunglasses, because the truth is that people are often mean or don't listen, not because they're so good or because they have the answers, but because of their own insecurity. And in that world, there have not been a lot of women. So there are definitely some men that don't necessarily want women there. And for me, that meant learning lessons like getting great allies. And sometimes the men can set situations straight that the women may be like. I learned this when I was playing on the Texas Revolution. One of my allies, Clinton Solomon, said, I am with you. I am your ally. You need to give them nothing. And if something bothers you, let me handle it, because I need them to all know that you're a part of our locker room. They're like, if you fight one fight, you'll have another and another and another. And I don't want that for you. Let me set a standard that she is one of us. And I didn't know what that meant until he did it. And I was like, and I've had players do that many times. And like, I'll come in with the attitude of like, my job is my players. And if somebody doesn't like me because I'm there, I'm going to give you the opinion. It's going to be the right one. I will stand on the table for my players. Whether or not you listen, that's not up to me, right? But I'm going to be consistent and authentic. So anybody who knows the scouting report on me will tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and they will either like me or not for it, but they will respect you. And then what happens when you go into another situation is the people who bring you in know what they're getting, right? They know that this person is authentic, well-educated, will give an opinion that is grounded in good data and fact and football and everything else when I have one. And if I don't always say something, right? And that also helps people with conflict, because they know when you speak up, it's something that's really important, whether it's something that's impassioned or something that's just, from a data perspective, they'll listen because you don't just talk all the time. And I think that's been really good. And in some of the situations, and I say this to whether you're the person who's in power or someone who is part of a diverse room, it really is about having good allies who set the standard of how people will be treated in conversation and how they won't. One of the teams that I coached for, some of my players said they've never seen someone so discriminated against, because the other coaches were mad before they even heard what I had to say, because I had more playing experience than any of them. And when I would try and say something, they would talk over me. And several times the guys were like, I'm sorry, the Hall of Famer was saying something. Coach, what was that? Right? And they would just, they wouldn't let it slide. And it got to the point where it wasn't just my players, it was all the players. And then the coaches were like, oh. And I pulled one aside after that, and he was like, "Oh, I just don't get why they do that." And I said, "Here's the problem. These players love me and I love them. And I've been the one who who stood up for them, and you just got here. And I think it's really sad because you're really smart at football, but you being so rude to me means they're not getting any of your knowledge because they just flat out don't like you. So what I'm going to do is suggest that if you'll change your attitude, I will be one of your best assets. But you are frustrating me because my players have tuned you out because of how badly he was like,
Dr. Welter, we may have lost your Wi-Fi for a second. We actually just have time for one more quick question and then some final thoughts. So I would ask you, both of you, what does it mean to be a strong woman? And as a strong woman, how do we empower other women to achieve their potential? So, Major General, we'll start with you. What does it mean to be a strong woman? And as a strong woman, how are you empowering other women, maybe even your children, to also reach their potential?
Well, I think it's really important to believe in yourself. I think people are sometimes, especially women, are quick to second guess ourselves. We don't want to try something until we're sure we're going to succeed, and so it's just a different mindset. And I've seen it frequently. And so one of the things we have to do is learn to believe in ourselves, and to be bold. And part of that is, being prepared. I like to think of luck as really like a crossroads between, being prepared and having opportunities. And so when those opportunities come, you jump into them, you be bold, you take away the fear factor and just go after those opportunities. And so I think it's important to, first off, believe in yourself, take smart risk, like be bold, try new things, seize opportunities. When opportunities are there, go after them, and then set the example for others to follow and encourage others. We one of the most important roles as a leader is to grow tomorrow's leaders and to help develop the women and men that are working with us and giving them opportunities and helping them develop. I think all of those are important factors.
Love it. Luck is the crossroads between being prepared and having opportunity. I really like that. And Dr. Welter, your thoughts on what it means to be a strong woman and how to empower other women to achieve their potential?
well, one of the first things I would say we have so many women on this call today, and the opportunity to have global impact. So I hope that I'm speaking for all three of us on this panel when I say just thank you. Thank you for investing in yourself and giving us an opportunity to hopefully give you maybe one kernel of truth or strength that you can pull on. Because I think all women are inherently strong. And I think that we are often not seen for how that strength truly manifests itself, right? I mean, she is a literal superhero. That's easy to see that she's strong. I literally got tackled by guys every day for a year. That's an easy definition of strong woman. And yet, the strength that women portray is often not the one that's glorified, and yet it's so inherent. It's this love and this ability to support so many people around them, and it's this strength of often putting themselves behind the scenes to support and do so many things. So the first thing is to just know that you were born to be strong, and you were born to be the strength of your house, your family, your work, your career, wherever you are. But that strength doesn't have to be hard, right? And I mean that in terms of being harsh, right? And it doesn't have to be a fight. Strength is sometimes silent, strength is sometimes standing up, strength is sometimes holding someone's hand. And you all inherently have that. Do not let anybody ever make you feel that your contributions are any less valuable because they may not be how other people would put it in the bucket of what we need, or that it may not be what's out front. You are powerful and wonderful, and you deserve to be prepared. You deserve to take the opportunities. You deserve the same training. And just know that and own that. And again, thank you for being here to not only support yourselves, but everybody around you. And then the last thing I would say is support other amazing women. Women do not do this to the extent that men do in terms of retweets and sharing and even making your dollars make sense, right? If you want to see women do better, take the dollars, because women have 87% of the purchasing power, and put those dollars behind women doing great things, right? Equality means that each one of us takes ownership in the ways that we can move the needle. And that's a place that all of you can do it.
I love it. Strength doesn't have to be hard. It can look like silence. It can look like standing up. It can look like support. I think that's a beautiful way to end today. And this conference, wellness and wisdom, two very important topics for women, for anyone really. And, you know, I just look at you both and I think, wow, I feel so lucky to have been on this panel, to meet my real life sheroes. And so thank you so much again for your time. Thank you, Pamela, for organizing this conference. It's been a true blessing in my life. And I hope everyone got something out of today's session. And I'll see you again soon. In a couple of hours, I'm moderating, so I'll see you on the next one. Thank you all.
Thank you.